For now, though, the New York City mayor has declared a state of emergency after flash flooding hit the city during rush hour.
The skies are darkening, the winds are picking up, and the ground is shaking. Upstate New York is facing an emergency like never before, and the order has been given. Everyone must evacuate. Families are fleeing their homes, businesses are shutting down, and the streets are filled with people seeking higher ground. The situation is dire, and the stakes couldn't be higher. This is a moment that will be remembered for generations to come, and the decisions made now will determine the fate of countless lives. The clock is ticking, and time is running out. This is the story of the mass evacuation of upstate New York, and it's a story that demands your attention. New York City, one of the popular states in the U.S. It is true that upstate New York gets a variety of natural disasters, from ice storms and blizzards to floods, and even the occasional hurricane. In recent years, New York has experienced a higher frequency of natural disasters and has been included in the Nationwide Disaster and Human Suffering Index. Between 1996 and 2001, New York experienced a severe ice storm, declared 5 federal major disaster declarations, and received more than $82.6 million in federal aid. In 2006, the southern tier was devastated by flooding, and again in 2011, the region experienced catastrophic flooding from Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee. The Health and Safety in the Above Disasters of Floods and Flash Floods in Upstate New York report looked at the human impact of natural disasters that occurred between 2006 and 2010. There were a total of 22 counties included in the report, in which it was identified that 578,671 people, which consist of 3.01% of the New York State population, experienced natural disasters. A variety of methods were utilized to identify this population. The total number of casualties was also identified, in which 167 people were injured, and 23 were killed as a direct result of the natural disasters. In 2010, New York was third in the nation for the number of deaths due to natural disasters. This report identified a significant impact on the incidence rates of various diseases and a significant worsening of the mental and physical health and well-being of those affected by natural disasters. This is clear evidence of natural disasters and the following impact having a substantial effect on the health and safety of those affected. The earthquake's indirect effects included the exacerbation of the spread of the cholera epidemic, which was originally introduced into Haiti by UN peacekeepers. The epidemic has caused many deaths through dehydration and kidney failure. Cholera is primarily spread from person to person by drinking water contaminated with the bacteria. Damage from any natural disaster increases the spread of waterborne diseases as the conditions for water poisoning are simply more available. These conditions include a high bacteria content, a lack of, or a limitation on access to clean water, and a lack of or damaged water sanitation resources. Measures to remediate water poisoning and the spread of waterborne diseases include a boil water advisory and chlorination of any drinking water. These strategies will be successful if access is available and they are carried out properly. For the population suffering from these health concerns, recovery is a long process. Waterborne diseases can linger in a population for a long time, even with prevention, due to the repetitive possibility of recontaminating a water source that has insufficient sanitation. This often happens in a developing country with a natural disaster and can be very disheartening for the population, as each repeat of infection is a reminder of the disaster. High blood pressure is also prevalent in an affected population involved in long-term recovery. This is due to the chronic stress of not knowing when the next disaster or crisis situation will occur. There are already several reasons why people are evacuating from New York, and with the way things are going, even more people will evacuate the city. So stay tuned to learn more reasons why everyone is evacuating upstate New York right now. Complex emergencies are political crises that also involve a breakdown of a population's security, resulting in a form of conflict. These crises cause a large number of deaths and an increase in mental health disorders. It also leads to a limitation on access to health services and resources, making it even more difficult for those affected by the crisis to recover from any health problems. Natural disasters can act as complex emergencies. An example is the 2010 Haiti earthquake. This earthquake caused extensive damage to the country's infrastructure and limited Haitians' access to health services. It also led to an increase in violence and insecurity. Natural disasters are extreme, sudden events caused by environmental factors that injure people and damage property. Earthquakes, windstorms, floods, and disease all strike everywhere on Earth, often with little or no warning. They cause a large number of deaths, injuries, and property damage. They also have a lasting impact on a population's mental and physical health. It is important to be prepared for these events, as preparation can minimize damage and aid in recovery. Natural disasters can have both direct and indirect effects on a population's health. Evacuation process. When Hurricane Irene hit upstate New York, it forced the largest state evacuation in the U.S. since Hurricane Katrina. As stated by Michael Smith, the American Red Cross's Division Disaster Executive for Eastern NY, the evacuation process was a challenge, especially due to the fact that the entire state of New York was at risk for emergency areas and evacuees. This required numerous counties to evacuate certain areas with a very specific population. There were some communities at risk that did not have electricity, so communicating the severity of the situation to those residents was a challenge. Interviewed at a shelter in Wood Gym at Binghamton University, an elderly couple from Vestal, New York, stated they did not realize the flooding would be this bad, and they couldn't bring their cat to the shelter because they were not informed this shelter did not allow pets. They stated they wished they had more information at the time of their evacuation. In an interview with the Tioga County Emergency Services Deputy Fire Coordinator, Dean Howard confirmed that even though Tioga County was ahead of the game and did an excellent job on early evacuations, there were last-minute evacuees coming to shelters with little information on their current situation of flood severity in their communities. During these cleanups and repairs from flood damage, it is important for these residents and business owners to be continuously updated on the recovery process. Failure to get information to all residents in evacuating areas about the precise severity of the situation can result in confusion and misunderstandings about the true need for evacuation in certain areas. This is what Columbia County found as an issue. The county attempted to have a bottom-up evacuation in stages based on the severity of flooding, starting in the towns closest to the Hudson River. Emergency management worked, and the flood-affected areas understood the situation. But there were communities that did not even realize the situation of 5,000 cubic feet per second dam releases on the local radio media, and late interviews were too late to make a Stage 2 evacuation call. The reasons behind the evacuation of people from upstate New York keep getting even worse. And even though there are authorities and people who are trying to help, there is still so much to do. Keep watching to learn more about these disasters and how they are being dealt with. Businesses and the infrastructure of the city have been hit hard by the evacuation, with many still picking up the pieces. There are long-term economic impacts as well, with many questions to be answered about whether the state and local economies will fully recover. Overwhelmingly, residents simply want to return to their homes, but environmental and structural safety must be ensured first. According to community leaders interviewed, Hurricane Irene was a disaster with regard to businesses and infrastructure, especially in comparison to the amount of actual damage caused by the storm. In the short term, businesses and residents did not expect this type of disaster, and many were unprepared for a week-long evacuation. This took an incredible toll on local commerce, especially in towns that only have one primary access road. The seasonal nature of the Adirondacks means that there is a short window to make money, and missing even a week of that window can be a deal-breaker for some businesses. It was clear from interviews with several community leaders that the future of some towns and regions will be decided this coming year, as the combined damage from the storm and long-term impacts of the evacuation may lead to another wave of Adirondack town extinctions. Many of the officials who were involved in the Hurricane Floyd evacuation in 1999 noted that the decision-making process for determining who should evacuate was very difficult. There were many misconceptions about who was in potential danger from the flooding and whether future evacuations should be ordered for these same people. The research that has been initiated by the social scientists and disaster researchers at RPI and UAlbany is to examine the storm surge flooding vulnerability of specific at-risk populations. Understanding these concepts will greatly help decision-makers determine if and when specific groups should be evacuated. Floyd left a lasting impression on all New Yorkers. The School of Public Health recently received FEMA funding to develop and test a curriculum to promote individual and family preparedness. Although the exact timing of the future evacuation could not be predicted with Floyd, tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings provide a critical opportunity for preparation. It has been shown that households that make decisions and preparations in response to a watch or warning tend to have much greater success in executing those decisions than those who wait until the event's potential impact is certain. This curriculum will focus on the promotion of proactive decision-making and preparation with the goal of more organized and successful future evacuations. Hurricane Irene in 2011. The Upstate New York project will closely examine the strategic, tactical, and personal issues involved when deciding to evacuate a city the size of Albany, New York, which has been called a mid-sized American city with all its complications by the New York Times. To do this, the case study of Albany, New York, will be a central focus of the project. This strategic evacuation was enforced between August 27th and September 1st of 2011 due to the record-breaking floods in upstate New York caused by Hurricane Irene. Hurricane Irene made landfall on August 27th. The Category 3 hurricane drew strength, made a second landfall in New Jersey the next day, and had technically weakened to a tropical storm. Irene moved north during the 28th and 29th, still packing strong winds and causing severe flooding in already saturated areas. Although Irene might have lost its tropical storm status during its second landfall, the amount of damage and the casualties led the National Weather Service to conclude that it was the sixth, the costliest hurricane in U.S. history. This justifies the actions of the evacuation of Albany, New York, when considering that Irene was no longer just a strong summer storm, but a historical weather event, something that had not been seen in over 150 years. The usual functions of an emergency operations center are to raise situation awareness, communicate effectively with the public, protect life and property, and provide recovery coordination during emergencies. During the 2011 evacuation, these functions were put to the test, but were difficult to carry out due to the spread-out nature of the affected areas, and the fact that the emergency management personnel were also affected and essentially became part of the population in need of the services they were trying to provide. The emergency operations centers proved to be effective in the areas that were not affected by the evacuation, because they were able to free up resources and assist the affected areas. Throughout the response phase of the evacuation, the New York State Emergency Operations Center and state officials were in constant contact with the affected counties, providing support, equipment, and resources. A great deal of assistance was also provided by federal representatives from FEMA, who were able to provide resources such as public assistance in the recovery phase. At the local level, mobility-impaired individuals were provided transportation to shelters and accommodations. Overall, the 2011 evacuation was a positive example of emergency management, and the most important thing is that we have learned and better prepared ourselves for future emergencies. Throughout the evacuation process and in response to the needs of the communities affected, a total of 29 counties declared a state of emergency. Emergency management is always the coordination and integration of all activities necessary to build, sustain, and improve the capability to prepare for, mitigate, respond to, and recover from threatened or actual natural disasters, acts of terrorism, or other man-made disasters. Over the last decade, New York State has put a great deal of effort and resources into developing and implementing a strong, dynamic emergency management program. The state and the counties that were affected were well prepared to respond to the needs of the population and the local governments. Each county has a director of emergency management and at least one emergency operations center, and was ready to spring into action as soon as the need arose. When a natural disaster occurs, it is important to take safety measures to prevent injury and further damage to property. This case held true for the evacuation due to Hurricane Irene. The use of concrete weights to secure tents was a safety measure taken to prevent injury and property damage during high winds. According to one Red Cross volunteer, bungee cords and other types of fastening devices tend to break in high winds or when debris falls on them. Tents become airborne hazards in such a situation. The idea to use concrete weights or blocks came from a state official in Florida, where there is a great deal of experience with high winds from hurricanes. Heavier weights, double staking, and wooden platforms were all ideas tried in Florida. Beefing up the number of stakes and length of ropes used to secure each tent was another recommendation made by a Florida state official. An evaluation of what did and did not work will be made after the use of concrete weights in New York. The impact of the evacuation. Rivera stated that over 100,000 New York residents were left without a way to escape the impending tropical storm or possible hurricane. As Irene approached, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority of New York City made an announcement to shut down all of its services as of noon on Saturday, August 27th, leaving many New Yorkers stranded who were vacationing for the summer. Starting at noon on Saturday and extending through Sunday, August 28th, 2011, all bus and subway services had been suspended, and all trains had been stopped, sealed, and stored in a safe location for reintroduction to service after inspection on the following Monday. This action was taken to avoid potential risky evacuations during high winds off elevated train tracks and the evacuation of trains in below-ground stations. Although this decision was made for good cause, many were left stranded and unaware of the storm event. In contrast, New York state-run Metro North and Long Island railroads provided extra trains on a normal schedule to ensure residents from those counties had adequate time and available transportation to return home and secure their property to take the best advantage of a window to return that was yet to close. An example of this is that the Long Island Railroad provided taxi service from the Long Beach line to Point Lookout in order to retrieve their vehicles before they become flooded in surge areas. Both of these decisions show initiative in helping people and preventing them from becoming displaced. Hurricane Irene caused transportation to shut down completely, leaving it difficult for those who had remained behind to walk through the water to meet their basic needs. Albright described this evacuation as chaotic and difficult, and further emphasized that much learning needs to be done in setting up and executing mass care in shelters. An example of this is the use of social media by local bus companies, most notably the NYSBA, which utilized their partnership with NYSDOT and NYSDOH to alert local evacuees to the location of pet-friendly shelters. This is a major step for transportation and evacuation in New York, and can be used as a future learning tool for emergency responders. Communication during an evacuation. Social media and the use of the internet have become prominent communication tools in recent years and are now being utilized during emergency events. During the Irene evacuation, several government agencies utilized social media in attempts to get information to the public. Emergency response teams to enhance preparedness for future events. In order for this information to be effective, those to whom it is intended need to receive it and comprehend it. This sounds simple. However, during large-scale events or disasters, it can be quite complex. During the evacuation for Hurricane Irene, the initial call for evacuations and the reasons for them were not clearly understood by the residents in the affected areas. As a result, many residents did not evacuate, and those who did were not fully prepared for what they would encounter and the possible effects the event would have on them. High-efficiency communication with intended message recipients in mind can help to prevent such occurrences and fully inform those in need. Communication during an evacuation is a key element in conveying the gravity of a situation. Public officials, emergency responders, media personnel, and various other private and public agencies work to provide information to the public and other affected agencies in a timely manner. This information includes the current status of the event, safety measures that need to be taken, and possible forecasts and outcomes of the event, future plans, and recovery efforts. Following the floods caused by the torrential rain of June 2006, recovery initiatives have been focused on creating a more resilient future for the affected areas. This section provides an overview of the course this has taken and the lessons learned for the future. Future plans and recovery efforts have been a strong focus of the affected communities since the event. This is typified by the grassroots initiative of the Fleischmann's Flood Commission, whose primary aim is to ensure that never again will flooding bring such devastation and such a toll on the quality of life. This group has been central to pursuing a proactive approach to dealing with flooding before it happens, and its efforts have been recognized by the Catskill Watershed Corporation through funding to implement flood mitigation measures. The Catskill Watershed Corporation has also been instrumental for the town of Middletown. Recognition of the need to improve the ability to predict flooding led to an application for funding through the Flood Hazard Mitigation Plan. The goal was to develop inundation maps that would then be utilized to aid decision-making processes during a flood event. This initiative would help steer future development away from flood-prone areas. Similarly, for the village of Margaretville, a $1.5 million grant was used to construct a retention basin that will help reduce flood impact downstream of the village. The Phoenicia Flood Relief Project is another example of preventative action, with a grant of $206,000 to develop solutions to flooding problems at specific locations within the town. This is most beneficial because, for each dollar spent on preventing flood damage, up to $4 in future costs can be saved. While little data exists on reconstruction initiatives, interviews with local officials and Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, personnel help document the scope of rebuilding efforts. Making communities flood-resistant is a primary goal in the rebuilding process. The village of Middleburg, New York, made the difficult decision to purchase and demolish 4 flood-prone homes. According to Mayor Matthew Avatabile, we are working with New York State and FEMA to return the properties to green space and install a green infrastructure project to help alleviate flooding in a portion of the village that is underwater during heavy rain events, so that area will not be built upon in the future. Similarly, the city of Oneonta is installing larger culverts and purchasing a commercial district in a nearby floodplain in an effort to return it to green space. Recognizing the dangers of rebuilding in flood-prone areas, local officials see this as an opportunity to make the affected portions of their communities more flood-resilient. In its long-term efforts to restore the community, members have forged several key recovery initiatives. A non-profit organization formed in 2006, the Prattsville Foundation, is striving to provide financial assistance and relief to residents and local businesses. Due to the desire for immediate housing in Prattsville at the time, decisions were made to issue building permits to residents, although they may no longer be in compliance with existing building codes. As it is likely that some residents will choose to sell their land to the NYS buyout program, a land bank is now being considered as a way to keep the community intact. The buyout program, funded by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, is being initiated in Prattsville and other nearby towns. The foundation is working to combat the negative connotations of the program commonly associated with giving up and moving on by branding it as an opportunity to start over. Simultaneously, in 2011, 50 students from the Cornell University Department of City and Regional Planning compiled existing community plans, assessed local opinions, and provided recommendations for the town of Prattsville and the village of Schoharie. These experiences gave birth to the Prattsville Community Planning Group, PCPG, and have led to future EFRC and prized risk and community vulnerability assessments. With funds, their new acquisition of floodplain maps, and a high watermark from the USGS, the PCPG has plans for guided land use planning. In times of stress or disaster, a strong community is the best asset. Building upon a lesson learned from the Esopus Creek Basin, positive and effective community support can help disaster recovery move quickly while maintaining social and economic stability. In the aftermath of the floods, local stakeholder meetings were held in the town of Phoenicia, New York, once residents and town officials could assess the extent of the damage. Registered professional damage estimators and floodplain managers led open discussions, during which they presented aerial photographs and maps that identified washed-out bridges, stream reroutes, and damaged homes and businesses. This provided a visual approach for the community to see where the damage was most severe. Afterward, a public presentation was held to further discuss findings and inform residents about plans for short and long-term recovery. This tool presented itself as an effective way to get the community involved in the recovery process, allowing them to provide meaningful input and assess the time frame for certain efforts. Lessons learned on evaluating evacuation plans. The analysis of the post-disaster period after a major flooding disaster in the Upper Mohawk Valley revealed several important lessons concerning the practicality of evaluating and implementing effective evacuation plans. Because the evaluation of these plans is rare and difficult due to the need for a real emergency to test the system, the disaster provided an opportunity to compare the actual population movement to the movement anticipated in the plan. Those areas affected by the flood that had an existing evacuation plan were matched to similar areas in the lower Mohawk Valley without a plan. Evacuation destinations and expected routes were compared through interviews with residents in the two areas. In general, it was found that the anticipated movement in the areas with plans was more accurate than the actual movement. However, an evaluation of the movement of those with special needs did not fare as well. We learned a lot about emergency response systems in disaster situations coming out of this project. The peak of the flooding phase was a classic example of a situation in which an emergency response system was proven to be very necessary, but ultimately failed to help the people it was meant to protect. We found that very often, in broken communities and disaster situations, there is a severe lack of communication with the outside world. Emergency response enthusiasts might call this islanding, which is when a community becomes isolated and cannot receive outside help or information. An island community can be at risk for a very long time and have its situation deteriorate from mild to severe. During the flooding, the village of Sydney was an excellent example of an island community. An emergency evacuation of Sydney was urged by the county government, but the mayor of Sydney feared the evacuation and ultimately decided to stick it out. This resulted in a deteriorating situation for the village from that point on, where the mayor admitted, "We were stranded. We had no communication with the outside world." This ultimately led to an even worse situation, when a nearby dam began to have its integrity compromised, and the village was unknowingly at even greater risk. An emergency notification from the county to the village about the dam would have been useful at this point, and may have resulted in the evacuation of Sydney, which was previously urged. But it's our belief that no notification occurred, because the county government itself had a poor understanding of what the situation in Sydney was at that time. On the part of the NWS, it has been found that more time needs to be devoted to informing the public about what their various watches and warnings mean and what specific preparations they should make when a flood event is imminent or a reality. This is being addressed by changes in defined terms and procedures and increased coordination with local and state emergency management officials in issuing simulated emergency alerts during NWS flood forecast exercises. Following the flood, a few studies conducted by various organizations have prompted the National Weather Service to reevaluate how it disseminates information to the public. The goal is to increase lead times for flood forecasts to times that are societally and technically more effective, and to improve the process by which information is transferred between various government and non-government agencies and the public during flood events. Techniques ranging from using high alphanumeric graphical displays to expert system decision support tools and public forums have been evaluated in an attempt to improve flood risk awareness and preparedness in at-risk communities. An expert system is being developed to help National Weather Service hydrologists determine the appropriateness and potential effectiveness of various flood risk education and preparedness techniques for different flood risk communities across the country. The evacuation of upstate New York is a serious matter, with thousands of people leaving their homes to seek safety elsewhere. The situation is critical, with the potential for danger and destruction looming large. We hope that this video has been informative and helpful in understanding the gravity of the situation. If you have enjoyed this video, we would be grateful if you could show your support by liking it and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us to continue creating valuable content that informs and educates our viewers. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe during this emergency.